Hi, my name's Will Chung and I'm a data scientist. In the previous video, we talked a little bit about what LLMs are and how they work. And today we're going to talk a bit about natural language generated evaluation. And what that means is simply how good are the answers actually coming out of the LLM, right? We want to figure out how to compute that. And there are generally two schemes when it comes to this kind of grading. One is real-time grading, which is grading a response live while a person is interacting with the chatbot. And this kind of allows for us to block responses that are incorrect or unsafe, right? And even answers that are iffy, we want to at least flag that to users if we want to show it to them. And so this kind of ensures the quality of the responses in real time being delivered to a user. And then next off, we have batch grading, which kind of looks not just at one session, but across many sessions with many different users to try to see overall what the quality of interaction is between them over a longer time frame. And so when it comes to grading, there's a lot of different ways to grade answers even before the advent of LLM. And so here are the more historical ways of grading natural language responses. The first set was called n-gram metrics, and they literally match word for word in a very lexical way of the actual response to an answer key, which is the appropriate response, and they try to grade based off of that. Things evolved a bit, and we've then had embedding metrics, which capture more on the semantical meanings, right? We're not just literally matching words, but also capturing the meaning behind the phrases between the LLM response and the actual appropriate answer key. One of the big things that is missing, even from these more advanced metrics, is that it doesn't take into account user preference. There's a lot of focus on feeling human in the responses, and so things like tone are not quite captured in the old ways, but there are new strategies in order to grade for that. But first, let's take a look at how these legacy metrics work. And so for n-gram metrics, we have these three here. We have blue, which is a precision metric in which it is looking at your candidate response against the reference answer key. And what it's doing here is trying to see how many from your candidate response actually matches the answer key, right? And so here you see that it produced a great score, but it is actually not have everything in the correct response, right? It doesn't have the word down, right? It has the cat sat, and the actual answer key has the cat sat down, and it's missing that downward, but because of the way it's scoring, it's only looking at how many within the candidate response is correct, right? And so a lot of times this blue is paired with this rogue metric, which kind of also matches word for word, but looks at how many of the answer key you actually have in your response, right? And so here it kind of punishes for the lack of the actual answer key in your particular answer here. And so these two are very often used together to help balance out the weaknesses of each of these scoring mechanisms and help in trying to map what the best actual score is. And so then we have this slightly newer meteor metric, which gives an attempt at trying to do something beyond just word to word matching, right? And so it kind of has like a mini thesaurus in the back, and it's actually trying to map synonyms. So here in the example LLM response, the feline rested, if you have the answer key that says the cat sat down, it sees feline, it sees cat, and it can kind of guess that these two are kind of synonyms of each other and try to match those two together, right? Same with rested and sat. So it kind of punishes a little bit less than those other two word for word matching, and tries to essentially map things that mean the same thing, right? It's that first attempt at a semantic meaning. But we get more advanced and we get these embedding metrics. So in the previous video, we also talked briefly about embeddings and how they're essentially mappings in a n-dimensional space, right? And so for BERT score, what is happening is it's taken token by token, or for more easier to understand, a word by word, and it is trying to map the closest word from the LLM candidate response and the reference answer key. And so once it does this word for word matching, it then computes kind of the closeness of the closest word in the candidate response versus its closest pair in the reference. And so that would be how it kind of maps the score. And so in mover score, it's a little bit more continuous, right? So BERT score is a little bit more word for word, but for moving score, you're actually mapping the entire response in the embedding space for both the reference and the candidate, and you're kind of computing the distance between the two holistically, right? So you can imagine it's like you have a triangle and you have two lines, right? One is the candidate and one is the reference, and you draw a third line to kind of close off the triangle, and that third line is the distance between your candidate response and your reference. And that distance, which the smaller it is, would be the smaller, the better would be your actual score. So with LLMs doing everything already, a lot of people now ask, why not use LLM as a judge as well, right? The first thing is scale, right? If you, in all those previous strategies we've seen, you kind of need to have an answer key. And so someone has to sit down and actually answer questions, or you have to catalog all the previous answers to previous questions to do this kind of mapping. And so with LLM as a judge, you don't need any of that. So it kind of scales quite well. And like I've said, right, if you amass this massive catalog to actually do the scoring, it might actually take some time to figure out which answer is the appropriate one to use as the answer key against your LLM response, right? And so with LLM, again, you don't need a reference. You just ask the LLM, and it's a lot faster if you don't need to fetch the appropriate reference to do this scoring. We've been talking about reference this whole time, but when you just ask LLM, hey, how good is this response, right? You don't need a reference, right? It will automatically kind of answer how well it is in general. And of course, cost and consistency, like we said, like if you have a human sit down and answer all possible questions to create this huge book of answer key, it's going to take a long time, and human experts are more expensive than tokens. So a lot of times it's much cheaper to have an LLM as a judge than a human subject matter expert as the judge. And last but not least, even when the human writes all these kind of answers and compiles this huge book of references, it's static. So if you ask follow-up questions in terms of like, okay, is this answer correct? But is this answer also cohesive? You know, is the tone right? Right? You can't ask that to a static reference book, but you can ask all those different dimensions of grading for a response to an LLM. And so when it comes to LLM as a judge, there's three different kind of variants that is often deployed. The first one is like asking a LLM judge to choose which of the two responses is better. Then there's asking LLM to judge a single response, like we've been kind of talking before, where it's just generates an answer and you ask it how good that particular answer is. And there also is reference guided grading, which we've kind of shown through the n-gram and the mover score and the BERT score as well. And so what happens here is like those kind of reference guided grading still sometimes is very important when it comes to things like math or critical reasoning, where the answer consistency is a little bit more important, right? 3 plus 3 is always 6. But if you ask an LLM enough times, it might generate a wrong answer, right? And so sometimes you do need those answer keys to enforce the LLM judge to give the same answer. And so a lot of people try to judge LLMs here and there, and these two particular open source databases kind of help give people a consistent set of answers, questions, and responses to grade their LLMs, right? And we're going to show, I'm going to link below a paper that talks about how well an LLM judge actually performs. And so in that paper, you're going to see they use a ChatGPT-4 as a judge, and they try to pit that against human experts to judge. And essentially what happens is that the GPT-4 judge receives two different responses, and it's going to pick which one is the better response, right? Pairwise grading. And the human expert also does the same thing. It receives those same pair of responses and it picks the one that it thinks is better. And then after all that, you're going to have a third human judge. We're going to call this person a ref, not to use the word judge too much. But the ref then looks at the GPT judge's answer and the human judge's answer and try to see which one it agrees with more if they're different, right? And so what we find is that this ref actually picks the GPT-4 judge slightly more than the human judge, surprisingly. And so through this experiment, a lot of people have gained the trust of using LLMs as a judge. And if we look at the performance scoring a little closer, we're going to spend a little bit of time reading this left-hand side chart here. But if you look at scores or like pairs of responses that are not very close, right? That is where we get the 85 to 81 percent agreement of the ref, right? So the ref agrees with the GPT-4 judge more than the human judge when things are not close. But sometimes there are variations where the two responses are kind of very close in terms of quality, and sometimes you can pick one over the other, but if you're kind of given a chance to pick again and the ordering, let's just say, of these responses are switched, you might pick the other one, right? So if you include the very close cut answers, you find that the human judge and the GPT-4 judge is still very close. So you don't really lose much when using LLM as a judge when you're looking at the results of this particular experiment, right? So it's a pretty awesome result, and it gives a lot of people courage to use LLMs as a judge. So yeah. But this paper kind of talks about some of the 4 biases that kind of show up, and is that these LLM judges have a position bias, right? Just like how humans kind of remember the last thing that's told to them the most, LLM judge has a tendency to prefer the answer that is given first, right? So if you're giving 2 responses that are very close, it might choose the first one, and then if you give it the same pair of responses to grade again, but you swap the ordering, it will still choose the first one, which was the second one in the first instance of grading. So there's that position bias there. There's a verbosity bias in which LLM judges like very long answers, even though a human might consider it to be a little bit verbose. They might pick it anyway. There's also a kind of self-selection bias, where if you're using a LLM judge that's from the same family as the LLM that generated the answer in the first place, say you have a GPT-4 judge, and then the one giving the response is a GPT-3, it has a bias against picking its own or scoring its own responses in its own family higher than, say, other LLMs. And so a lot of times you have to be careful and make sure your LLM judge is of a different family. Maybe use Claude to grade responses from a GPT-4 model, or vice versa, right? And also, this is always true, but it is kind of slightly weaker than the human when it comes to math and reasoning from a consistency standpoint, right? You ask a human 1 + 1 over and over and over and over again. This person probably won't get it wrong, but LLMs might, because of it's probabilistic, right? It might just, after the millionth time you ask, it might just produce a wrong answer. And so if consistency is extremely important, maybe a decision tree or another mechanism might be a better way to deliver an answer than an LLM. So thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe if you want to hear more. And I linked the paper here, but I will also add the clickable link down below. Thank you.